Hello, friends. Welcome to the Premature Bible Institute. My name is Doug Schaible, and I'm just welcoming you to this next set of lessons that we're working on. Right up to this point, we've learned an awful lot about what, God having created everything, puts the man and the woman in this perfect environment, a perfect garden, perfect food, perfect relationships and everything. And then somebody enters the scene who's an enemy of God, which was Satan, the one who rebelled against him in heaven, and God had to cast him out. And now his job is to try and thwart God's eternal purposes. At least that's what he thinks he can do. And once again, that shows how irrational their thinking became. So, that being said, I think it's good maybe if we review just a little bit, but we really don't have to review a lot. All we have to do is just kind of read the verses, and that almost is the review in and of itself. But we'll just explain a couple things there. So from last week, I want to read Genesis chapter 3, verses 9 through 13, and we'll go over that. It says, "Then the Lord God called to Adam and said to him, 'Where are you?' So he said, 'I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself.' And he said, 'Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat?' Then the man said, 'The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate.' And the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is this that you have done?' The woman said, 'The serpent deceived me, and I ate.'" So we saw, like we talked a little bit last week, that their thinking became irrational and became illogical. The first thing they tried to do was cover themselves by making those clothing out of fig leaves. Anyway, making those, they tried to cover themselves from a God who can see everything. Then they tried to hide from a God who's everywhere, and now we see them trying to pass the blame on a God who knows everything there is to know. So there's nothing here really for them to hide. God is asking them rhetorical questions simply because he wants them to admit their guilt. So he did confront them. He comes to them, but he does it in a way, once again, where the only answer you can give him is the true answer. Anything else is just a flawed and faulty thinking. When we see that's exactly what happened the moment they sinned. First of all, God started asking rhetorical questions. First one, he asks Adam. He says, "Where are you?" He says, "I hid because I was naked." He says, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I told you not to eat from?" And so what does he do? He tries to shift the blame. Adam does. "Well, the woman that you gave me, she gave me of the fruit from the tree, and I ate." So he's shifting that blame. So then God goes to the woman and says, "What have you done?" And she says, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." So she was honest, but still, once again, she just didn't say, "I disobeyed you, and I shouldn't have done that." No, she says, "The serpent deceived me." So it was her. She's blaming the serpent on that. So God starts now from this point on, we're going to see a reason for why the world is the way it is. This lesson will start that process out. So God pronounces judgment on Adam and Eve and their sin. And but first, before he starts off with them, he does one other thing. He starts off with the serpent. He makes a statement to the serpent. And he's also talking to Satan at the same time. And he says this in Genesis 3:14. "So the Lord God said to the serpent, 'Because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle, and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life.'" So this creature would be one that would crawl on the ground. We don't know if it's like a snake or a lizard or whatever, but it was a serpent. It was a reptilian type of creature of some sort, and the judgment was that it would not be like the other animals in any way, shape, or form. And so anyway, you'll eat dust all the days of your life. And he's not talking about literally eating dirt, but it's just that's eating dust. Like, have you ever had anybody tell you, says, "Man, he bit the dust"? And what are they talking about when they say that? That is a euphemism for they died. But another one, too, sometimes, man, he face planted or whatever. Those are ideas that you just live down there in the dirt and you stay there and you live there all the time. Now, we don't know what the serpent looked like for sure. Like I said, it just doesn't tell us who the serpent or what the serpent looked like. But God did address the serpent directly. and said, he pronounced a judgment. Now, once again, like I say, I think we realize from other passages in Scripture that the devil is referred to as the serpent, that old serpent, the devil, is referred to that way. But in any event, this person, this animal would be more cursed than any beast of the field, anything else. And though, Satan could decide, he could disguise himself from Adam and Eve, but he could not disguise himself from his Creator. And that's the thing about God. God knows everything there is to know. There's nothing you can hide from him. Adam and Eve couldn't hide from him in the garden. Satan can't hide himself in the form of something else. God knows who Satan is and knows what he's capable of doing. So God decides that he's going to pronounce judgment on both the woman and the serpent. First the serpent. So he says this, you're more cursed than any beast of the field. On your belly you shall go. You shall eat dust all the days of your life. And then in verse 15 it says this, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. A lot of cryptic language right here in some ways. I will put enmity between you and the woman. In other words, enmity is this kind of we have a term in Solong where we used to work the tribe. It's called ngeng. And ngeng means that they're always battling, fighting. There's an animosity towards one another. They don't like each other. There's a constant strife between the two. So he says, I will put enmity between you and the woman. So there would always be this animosity between the two. And between your seed, talking about the serpent, and her seed. And this is a reference, as we find out later on, this is a reference to the future solution. I'll say solution. The future remedy to the whole issue of what happened right here in the garden. So he said, I'll put image between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head. In other words, this deliverer, this redeemer that's coming, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Now, I'm sure both of those terms, bruise your head, bruise your heel, have a particular meaning to them when they were heard by the people hearing it. I'm not sure. I understand ultimately what it means. I don't understand the reference as much, and I'll just be honest about that. When somebody says, man, you're going to bruise his heel, I'm not sure what they meant exactly by that, but we did see what happened in the end. I don't know if you call it a double entendre or not, but anyway, it's just that idea that it has more than one meaning in it. There was a literal meaning like right there and there, but there's also a literal fulfillment to that meaning that would come later on. So in any event, you can see that there's going to be this trouble, this strife, this animosity between the woman and the serpent, and between her seed and his seed. And so, but we know what's going to happen. He says, this seed of the woman is going to bruise your head. He's going to strike a fatal blow. You will bruise his heel. You'll hurt him, but you won't destroy him. So God doesn't, and this is something we found out earlier, God doesn't reveal all of his plans at one time. He's telling us something in form, and then all of a sudden now it's like the rest of history is going back and filling in details and building up to this point. So he keeps doing this a lot. So God doesn't reveal all of his plans at once. Just like when we saw where God created all the vegetation, when he created light and air and dirt and water, we weren't sure. A person, if they were hearing this for the first time, would not be sure why they were doing that, why God was doing that. But then we saw the plants come into being. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. The plants needed all those things. And then all the animals needed all the plants and everything also, and the mankind and everything needed it also. So he doesn't reveal everything at once, but he does reveal them. It's kind of like, I know a lot of times when we're driving around, and we see new construction going up, and not in housing, it's just like we up here for years and years. We've had this one lot up here north of us that's just been an empty lot, big open field. It's probably a quarter. I don't know if it's a quarter mile by a quarter mile, maybe an eighth of a mile by an eighth of a mile. And it's been an empty lot. And then all of a sudden, we noticed that there was construction was starting in this. We saw land being cleared. We didn't know if there was going to be shopping going in there or what. And we saw who was building it, but it didn't say what they were building. And it's kind of like that with some buildings. You can look at it, you don't know what's going up, but some of them, you can pick it out earlier than others because you're used to the shape of a building, like a Pizza Hut. If you see a Pizza Hut and all of a sudden you see that famous roof line, you think, Pizza Hut's going up there. Or if you see a Taco Bell or a McDonald's or whatever, you can figure them out a little bit ahead of time just because you're familiar with the way the buildings are built. But in this case here, God's building something brand new, and so he's building a little bit at a time, and so there's very little at this point. We're just clearing ground a little bit right now, getting ready to start pouring the foundation for everything that's going to be coming later. A good example I can think of this is Walt Disney World down in Orlando. When Walt Disney built Disneyland out in Anaheim, California, he built this spectacular place. It opened in 1955, and I don't remember seeing that open up, but I just knew about Disneyland growing up. And there were things that he did with that one that when he decided to build a second one down in Orlando at Disney World, he learned from mistakes that he made in the first one. There were some that were advantages. There were some things he did that were right, but he felt that there were some things that he did that were wrong, that he wished he would have thought it through, or I guess it's just in the process of working on it, finding out. One of those is that he thought that all themes within a park, such as Epcot Center or World of Tomorrow or whatever section it is, the international section, each one of those sections should be a self-contained unit, and they shouldn't mix with each other. You shouldn't see Cinderella over in the World of Tomorrow and different things, Magic Kingdom, things like that. So he wanted to keep them contained in their own areas, but he knew that the people had to, maybe do more than one different part a day. Like maybe they might be in Magic Kingdom one part, Epcot Center at another time. And so what he decided to do was build tunnels, build basement underneath Walt Disney World so that they could travel from one place to another that way. They could see people, they wouldn't see somebody going into a building but come out dressed as normal clothing, things like that. So he just wanted to keep everything, the experience where they were at, where the customers were at, where the visitors were at, always keep it pure so that it looked good all the time. The only problem with Orlando is that they couldn't build a basement because the water level for the whole area is a very high water table. And so what they did is that, I don't know if many of you know this or not, but the whole park is built up off the ground. So when you're walking out on the cement or on the asphalt or wherever you're walking around there in Walt Disney World in Orlando, you're walking 10 to 15 feet above ground. And everything, the basements and everything are all underneath there because they had to build the basements above ground level also. So all of that is just built up on that. And another thing that they had to do is he couldn't go out there and just start buying land, because the moment they found out it was Walt Disney that was buying land, everybody would jack up the prices of their land so that they could get the most money out of it. So what he did is he got all these different little kind of phony companies or what do they call that, shadow companies or whatever, and they were buying up plots at different places. They knew where they wanted to go, but they would have different companies buying different spots at different times, so nobody would be suspicious. Well, eventually somebody did get suspicious, but it was a very well-kept secret. And so they were able to get the land at a lower price so they could build their park and so on. So anyway, those are things that happen. God doesn't reveal all of his plans at one time. He builds. He starts with a foundation, and he keeps building upon that, and that's what we're doing here. So the things that we've learned about God so far is that he is eternal. Well, remember we talked about there are three aspects or three characters right now in this story. There's God, there's people, there's Satan. Okay, God is eternal. Man is not. Satan is not. God is all-powerful. Man is not. Satan is not. God is everywhere at the same time. He's omnipresent. Man is not. People are not. Satan is not. God knows everything. People don't. Satan doesn't. Okay? He's loving and kind. People can be loving and kind, but Satan is never loving and kind. Everything he does is with the motive and the intention of getting people not to follow the Lord or to do anything like that or to ruin God's reputation. God is perfect. People are not. Satan is not. But although people and Satan were created perfect because a perfect God created them, but because they made this particular choice here and because Satan made his particular choice, mankind and the angelic realm, or at least those angels that followed him, became imperfect beings. They were flawed. He punishes those who fight against him and disobey his commands. That's just something he can do, and he does. And one thing, God always keeps his word. Mankind doesn't always keep his word, and Satan does not keep his word at all. So God is different. He's in a category all his own. He's perfect and lives there in that realm. And now he's dealing with this situation. Now sin has entered into his creation. They made a choice to... It's not so much the idea, it is rebellion. It isn't so much the idea of says, hey, I don't want to follow God. It's just they decided to think independently of God. They decided to do things on their own and not consult or listen to God and what he had to say. As a result, this is the problem that they had. So now, we talked about that before. So did Satan win now? Now that he has got them to disobey God, has he won? Did God have to figure out another way to win? No, God in his mercy always has a way to win, and he knew that this was going to happen from eternity past. So another attribute of God is now going to be revealed that he hadn't up to this point revealed yet, but he is. Psalm 145, verse 8 says this, "The Lord is gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger, and great in mercy." So God is gracious. Adam and Eve did not deserve God's mercy. They didn't. And Adam and Eve deserved God's justice, didn't they? That's right. They deserved to be the same thing that happened to with Satan. But there is a difference between Satan and I think and with Adam and Eve. Satan saw God face to face. He was there with him, saw him in all his majesty and glory. He saw him create the universe, as far as we know anyway. So he was different in that way. But God says something that's okay. Yes, this did happen, but I'm going to provide a way out. He said, I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, you shall bruise his heel. I'm going to provide a way out. It's going to take time, but we're going to provide something. And God was going to provide a deliverer, somebody who could take care of this situation. He's not revealing how he's going to do it yet, but just knowing that it is going to be done. God didn't need to do this. We have to remember that. God didn't have to provide a way out. He didn't have to provide anything. He could have judged them right there completely, sent them off to a lake of fire, and would have been completely justified to do that. But then again, he wouldn't have shown his mercy either. It isn't that he had to. He wanted to. God is a gracious God. God does what he does because he wants to, but never out of a sense of need. That's something you always remember. That's the essence of grace. God doing what he does because he wants to, but never out of a sense of, but he doesn't need to. Okay? This is the essence of grace. Now, even though God was gracious, there were going to be consequences to Adam and Eve's sin. Just because God is a gracious God doesn't mean there aren't consequences. I can sin, and I can even choose to sin knowing who God is, but there will always be consequences. I've told people this before. I said, God will allow you to make any choice you want. The only choice he won't allow you to have is the choice of consequences. That's his realm and his realm alone. He chooses the consequences for our actions. Sometimes we think they're good, sometimes we don't, but it doesn't make any difference. It will be good because God is always doing things that are good. So God was gracious, and there were going to be consequences. So what is he going to do? He's going to pronounce judgment on the woman, on Eve. And here's what he says. To the woman, in verse 16, to the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desires shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Boy, I tell you what, that doesn't fit well in our culture today, does it? Especially with, with a lot of the rights that some women are trying to do, and how some men think they have the right to rule over the woman like she's property or whatever. It doesn't fit into the way we look at things, does it? But that doesn't matter. It's God who's the one that's telling us this, not man. This is before the law. This is before Christ. This is before anything. This is the first thing. So let's just take this just for a second. Let's see if we can truly understand. It says, to the woman, so he's talking about Eve, he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. Now, I tell you what, I don't know any woman that says that it was a lot of fun giving birth. And I and I don't know how many of them talked about how nice it was to have the back pain, the swelling, and all the different things, the baby kicking, how much fun that was. No, it wasn't. He said, I'll multiply your sorrow and your conception. So it's not going to be a pleasant experience, but it'll pay off, and then there will be a blessing in that. But it's going to be, the woman will look forward to the baby, but it's still not going to be easy, all right? He says, in pain you shall bring forth children. I can still remember our first child. When she was born, my wife was in labor, I think like 16, 17 hours, and it wasn't very easy. She was so worn out by the time our daughter was born. It was pretty amazing. And it says, then he says, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Now, I tried to really sit down and think this thing through as best I can of why God would give this particular judgment, if you want to put it that way, to Eve. The only thing I think I can come up with is this. When God gave the original command not to eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, who did he give that to? He gave it to Adam. So Adam was the one who received the command. He said, that's not what I don't want you. Don't eat from the tree. But when Eve came along and the serpent, it says, tricked her, he said, what did the serpent say? Did God really say you shall not eat of every tree in the garden? And she then says this, no, God has said. So she is quoting as though God himself said what she's getting ready to say. He says, no, he says, we're not to touch it or we're not to eat from it. Neither are we to touch it. So God had never said that. And so what happened was, then he says she got the fruit and she ate. So she not only disobeyed God, but she also didn't listen to her husband, his admonition, let's say. Maybe Adam had said, God said we're not to eat from the tree, so let's not even touch this thing. Don't even go near it. Maybe that's what he said. I don't know. But I think it was probably the idea that she, let me put it this way. She rejected both of their admonitions to not eat from that tree, both God and her husband. And so that may be why the double whammy was put on her on that one. It isn't that God doesn't care for her any more than the man. As a matter of fact, you'll find out later on here. Well, listen, we'll talk about it here. So that's the judgment that he puts on the woman. But on the man, he puts this judgment in verse 17 through 19. Then to Adam he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake. You shall not eat of it. Oh, I'm sorry. Went up to verse. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So It's not going to be easy on the man, believe me. He says, you've heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten a tree. So you listened to what she had to say, you ate from it. Now, it's really funny because in Scripture, if you read through it, this sin, the general sin here is never attributed to the woman. It's attributed to the man. So it says, for by one man's sin, death entered into the world. Okay? So death came, it says, by the result of what the man did, not by what the woman did. So anyway, just to let you know that. It says, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. Okay, so now he says, the ground's even going to suffer from this. So remember what I told you before? No sin, only if there isn't any sin that affects only the person who committed it. As Eve sinned, it affected her husband. Now, as Adam sinned, it not only affected Eve also, but it affected the ground, even the earth, and the animals, because now they die. It says, cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. It's going to be hard work. Up to this point, easy work for Adam and Eve to manage the ground and do everything. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat of the herb of the field. So you're going to be eating from the plants, but you're going to be competing with thorns and thistles and stuff like that in order to get that weeds, all the different things, and probably the bugs and insects. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. In other words, until the day you die, you're going to be working hard to eke out a living. He says, for out of it you were taken, where? The ground. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So you're going to go right back to the same place you came from, right back to the ground. See, up to this point, Adam would have only come from the ground. He never was planted. He was never to go back to the ground. But now he's going back to where he came from. So Adam and Eve now are the parents of all people. So in Genesis 3:20 it says this, and Adam called his wife's name Eve because she's the mother of all living. So all people that have ever been born on the face of the earth came from these two people, Adam and Eve. All right? And then Acts 17:26 kind of helps this out. It says, and he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth. So everybody, all races, all people came from two people, Adam and Eve. In Romans 5:12 it says this, therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all sinned. So here's the point. That's exactly what I was telling you before. Death has been passed on. It became genetic at this point. I have received the death penalty because my parents had the death penalty on them also. Listen, why is my skin white? It's because my parents were white. Why is another person black? Because their parents were black. And so on. The different ones. We inherit those. That's genetic. Now, where the different races came, not absolutely sure that I know that, but it doesn't make any difference. I do know that that the sin nature that came from the first people, so everybody's going to get it because they're the ones who had it to begin with. We all have inherited our physical features from Adam, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, so on. So we have inherited our propensity to sin from him also. And we, by nature, are flawed human beings. You know, it's like I told before, Adam is the trunk, Adam is the trunk, and we are the branches. And if you cut the trunk, if you cut down the tree, the trunk, the branches are going to die too because they can no longer receive the life, the sap from the ground where it was coming from. God is the stump, if you want to put it that way, and the roots and everything. We get all of our life from there or from the ground. But we've been cut off with the trunk. We've been chopped down. And because of that, we're going to die also. There isn't anybody that hasn't died. Now, remember this. Satan didn't make Adam and Eve eat from the tree. He didn't make them. They chose to do so. They made a conscious choice to do that. Sure, Eve was deceived, but at the same time, she made a choice. Adam, it says later on in 2 Timothy 2, that he wasn't deceived, but yet he chose to do so also. So, man, like I said, they made a bad choice, like that from Indiana Jones and Last Crusade. You have not chosen wisely, that type of thing. So that's what they did. And now we choose a lot of our things, not so wisely either. So all of the world's problems can be traced to this, because any problem in the world that we have is a result of a choice of man to do something. Wars, sickness, death, all these things are a result of what those two did. Yeah, there are things in nature that we can't affect, but it's just the effect of man's sin has affected everything in the world. Now, three things changed when they disobeyed God, and this is something we need to think about. One is their relationship to God changed. They are now no longer part of His family. They've been cut off from the source of their life. Second, their relationship to each other. Now there would be animosity, not only between man and the woman, and the man and mankind in the spirit world, and mankind and God. So their relationship to each other would change. Now, where before they were partners in this whole situation, that they were both going to rule the earth, and there was, no seeming division of labor. Now the woman is to be subject to the man is to look out for the wife, and all these different things that are coming up, and it's just a mess because of what those two did. And then their relationship to life and health. They were going to die. They would get sick. They would get hurt. They would bruise and get cut and all different types of things. So those things changed as a result of this. So we're going to continue on, and we're going to continue talking about this more. There's still more to come as this. This is just a little bit of what has happened to them. So they made a choice to sin. They turned their back on God and decided to go their own way. As a result, there was consequences to that. God pronounced judgment, but He's not finished with the judging. There's more to come yet, and you can see that just out of one simple act of disobedience, the ramifications of that have been just going on for thousands and thousands of years now. So you all take care, and thank you so much for listening. If you have some friends, please have them sign up, have them subscribe on my YouTube page at Doug Schaible. And also, if they're listening to audio podcasts, just get on there and look up the Premature Bible Institute and look for me there. And I just want to thank you guys so much for listening. You all take care. Bye.